I'm going to start with you, Brian. Just it is a broad topic. So for the context for the rest of the hour, can you kind of set the stage? How should we all be thinking about this domain when we talk about artificial intelligence?
Sure, thanks. And I think this will help, again, set the stage for how we're thinking about it for the rest of this discussion. But I'd be willing to guess when you have a conversation with somebody about AI, their definition and your definition, or their scope and where you think the scope is probably not necessarily 100% aligned. So the whole idea here is not to solve that right now, but at least to frame it up for this purpose of the conversation. The way that we think about it typically is in two larger buckets. One being around the advanced analytics space. And so those are things when you think about how we can use technologies like machine learning to do things like classification type of opportunities or even predictive outcomes of where we want to go in the future. So building models around, training a model that has a picture of 100 dogs and you feed it another dog and it tells you, yeah, that's a dog. So that's a classification type of scenario. The other would be more predictive in nature. So we were just talking backstage about how the growth of the Markel family shareholders meeting has been growing over the last few years. And so you take historical data and try to predict something that may happen in the future. So maybe able to predict next year how many people will be sitting in this auditorium or a larger auditorium possibly on the topic of AI. So that's more on the advanced analytics side. And where most of the excitement over the last 2 years, quite honestly, has been in the generative AI side. And so when a lot of people think about AI, they think about really or just what is happening in this whole generative space, which is about creating new content, creating new items with these sorts of large models. And so when we think about it, those are the two different categories we typically break it up to. And I think a lot of the perspectives that we bring to the conversation will be in those various areas.
Great, thanks. And so when we rewind the clock about 1.5 years when ChatGPT was rolled out and made publicly available, it launched this huge flurry of activity. And I remember being in this meeting last year. There were a couple questions about it in the main room, and it was new for everybody. I remember even some of the folks on stage pointed to CapTech and said, "Go talk to those folks if you're interested in hearing more." And we've been learning along the way. But I guess it was November of 2022, I believe, whenever that rolled out. And early that year, my 88-year-old mom asked me what I think of artificial intelligence, so I knew it had hit the peak of the hype cycle at that point, if she was able to ask me about that. But Nicole, in that time, it's been quick moving, and you also have kind of some historical context of what it's meant in the past. But what have you seen in terms of how organizations and people in general have kind of approached or been thinking about their approach to AI moving forward?
You're right, Andy. Huge flurry, right? It's what everybody talks about now. How do we kind of distill that apart and leverage it? That's really what businesses are focused on now. And in a sense, it's really democratized the use of AI. We've all used it in certain senses and even to increase productivity. For example, we all have maps and GPS applications, right? And historically, you had to break out a map, an atlas, and figure out where you're going, write down the steps and all of that. Well, now that's kind of built in for us. So in our day-to-day life, that has increased productivity. I see AI and the way businesses are looking at it now are really in 3 facets. It's how do we increase our workplace productivity? How do we re-engage our customers and drive customer experience? And lastly, what does our workforce look like to really be able to implement these things? So kind of the first realm there, we now have AI that we can interact with every day to help us really do our jobs better and more efficiently. So before it may have taken me, an hour to really craft an email. How do I do this? Now I can leverage AI to really kind of get me started. It doesn't write the entire thing for me or really take away my personal touch on it, but it can get me started and really I can leverage that to even have more innovative thoughts in what I'm going to put in there. It can take notes for me, right? When I have a meeting, which I used to have an extra person potentially in the room with me as I'm engaging my clients. Now I have that ability for it to really take the notes for me, and I can leverage that. So it's increased our productivity. The next step, right, when we're looking at that for us, our customers want that. So it doesn't really matter what space you're in. If you have customers, they really want to re-engage in a different fashion. They don't want to have to click through 19 menus anymore to get to the information that they need. They're really looking for more of an interactive virtual assistant experience. And you're starting to definitely see those pop up. where they can go and ask a question, and they want the interactive virtual assistant to know who I am. I want you to understand that maybe I purchased a product for you. Am I looking for information on that? What are my patterns? And these large language models are really giving us the ability to customize and focus in on our customers and really drive that engagement. But with all of that, we need people to do that, right? So you're looking across your business and understanding what kind of folks do I need here to support this. And there are tools and you can go out and implement it, but without guardrails and without people really understanding what the factors of AI are, you can get into some tricky situations. So you really want to have folks that understand model bias, understand what the output is. You want to understand how to kind of integrate it into your existing systems and really change management as well, because it is going to impact how you do your job on a daily basis. And it's just kind of a different shift in thought of how you can leverage it. So I really think if you kind of combine those three topics, we get to what AI is important today, right? It's workplace productivity, it's re-engaging your customers, and then it's having the correct workforce in place to make sure the guardrails are there and we use it accurately and fairly.
Right, and I think what's really important there, those aren't new things. Those are not new to business, right? What we're seeing is a lot of organizations try to figure that out. I think at first, when there was all this hype, it was, what are we going to do with AI? How are we going to prepare for it? And now it's really a matter of just, well, we're going to continue to run our business. How can AI help? So I think that's starting to land and get a little bit more commonplace in terms of the general start point or the understanding that we're seeing. So those are kind of the big, broad concepts, Nicole, that you touched on. I'm kind of simple in the way that I like tangible examples. So Kevin, can you just give a few examples? And Kevin's one of kind of our probably furthest reaching kind of researchers in this space. So not only just what we're doing with our clients, but sort of looking out into the industry as a whole. Maybe give a few examples for the audience on some of the kind of most tangible or best use cases and applications where we're starting to see organizations, whether we're working with them or not, really deliver on some of the business value.
Sure, yeah, and I mean, it changes daily. We were just looking, what's the latest news in case we miss something but right before we walk out. And of course, I think right now, Anthropic's actually having a keynote of some major discoveries they've done. So we'll catch up on that. I think, for what's actually practical right now and being done out in the business world, you see a lot of some of the sort of lower hanging fruit that are easier areas of entry that you can get in on. So think about content generation, right? You used to have to have, if you want to create more content, now you've got to scale people to be able to do that. Now you can take your content creators and they can guide AI, to even go down to the personalization level to where every single customer that you're interacting with can have a custom message that's tailored specifically to them in a way that we really haven't been able to do before we have this natural language understanding that we have now. Customer service then towards that as well. Chatbots are something that are fairly easy for people to roll out basic versions of, at least. There's a lot of guardrails that you need to start worrying about at that point. And I heard an anecdote where in the fraud space, somebody was actually going out using AI to figure out what to specifically say to the chatbot there at the bank, so that they would be able to kind of weasel their way through, the exact channel of communication to get to what they need. But that's a big one, right? Because you get
Can you talk about that just for 1 second, a little bit more on the chatbot, because chatbots have been around for 5 or 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Pretty lousy ones in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
But you've all been stuck in those IVR loops, right? I just want to talk to a person. But I think we're approaching a place pretty quickly where you would prefer to maybe speak to AI because you are going to get the answer more quickly. Can you talk a little bit about just what are those, like, how has that difference come about? What does that look like?
Sure, yeah. So the chatbots that we've had traditionally have really been about defining particular intents or topics, right? So I'm going to listen for keywords and triggers, which is, what the IVRs are largely based off of. And then it's a lot of logical branching, right? So I said, yes, I'm interested in this, and then I yelled 17 different things. And I know on the other menu, I can get to what I want, and I can't get back in the conversation. So what generative AI really allows us to do is either replace that or layer on top of it or layer on underneath it. Again, the way you integrate it really depends on how your company and your data and your information is laid out. But it allows you to more seamlessly transition in between different contexts, understand, the entirety of the conversation, so that as you switch topics and go, well, I was trying to make this deposit. No, I'm also still trying to find out about this loan, right? And I don't have to go back and forth, and I can still kind of get a full picture. And the development of that is a lot simpler. Trying to think through all of the different ways that you can have a conversation and think about like the actual, typing chat interface over the IVR, all of the different ways that we express ourselves and make typos and use different kinds of words, small nuances, even regional types of things, right? You call, is it a ham and pineapple or a Hawaiian pizza, right? And so you kind of have to think through a lot of different ways around how we communicate before you're really building out a robust chat experience, which is why they're terrible. And now you don't have to. Now you really just have to understand your business, and you have to understand the things that you want to say about it. You can rely on the large language models, again, rely on under the context of guardrails and protection and testing evaluation. But you can rely on that to help communicate that out in a much more efficient, much more, again, contextualized manner.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe double down on that guardrail scenario, because I think the last thing that we want to have is just rolling out these new generative AI type capabilities to the general public that are uncontrolled, right? I think everyone's seen news examples, whether they're unintentional, like people buying airline tickets for prices maybe they shouldn't have gotten them for, or people being malicious and trying to buy a Chevy Tahoe for $1. Like, all those types of scenarios exist out there in the world, and you have to make sure you're having those guardrails in place. The other example I think we see oftentimes in right now is just these generative AI tool sets and these large language models are great for is just simplifying things in a way that are easy to digest. A prime example, I think we've been doing a lot of work with just even in the legal space around contracts, and taking large contracts, and how do you really only want, as an end user, as someone that I might look at a contract for certain terms, I only care about 3 or 4 different terms on a regular basis, but I have to filter through an entire contract to see that. How can I use generative AI as a way to summarize content in a way that gives me the information that's most relevant for me? And I think those sorts of examples are applicable right now and really, really powerful, but also easy to implement.
Yeah, and I mean, on the contract front, it's oftentimes you're looking for particular triggers, something that's very bad and I don't want to agree to this, or something that's missing that I know is necessary, or maybe lawyers all use different language. Again, being able to bridge that that barrier, that translation is really critical. I think that also goes towards one of the other areas that we see AI being very successfully deployed is automating some of the work that's being done, right? So that's one example, but between Microsoft's announcement of Build yesterday and Google's announcements last week at Google I/O, those companies are really looking towards, how do I build a virtual employee, and how do I put them into situations where they will be productive and provide value? So on the note-taking example, right, what does it look like to have a virtual employee that can do more than take notes? What can they do if they start synthesizing those, combining those across different meetings? What insights can be gathered? What efficiencies can be gained? What actions can be taken, right? It's certainly capable. If I've got to follow up and set up a meeting, AI can handle that, right? I can trust it to do that. So a lot of personal automation in terms of the productivity gains are coming. And I think that then starts to scale, and we're seeing it, some of our clients towards just entire end-to-end process automation. And that's more than the automation that has been done traditionally, which is kind of if, then, this, that, right? And this is more like, oh, this thing happened, how do I respond? This is a complex problem space now that I used to have a domain expert in that had been there for 10 years to accumulate all of the knowledge, and now you kind of just get that out of the box.
Right. So those are all great examples, and we're like we said, we're seeing our clients are learning alongside us in many cases, right? But there are a lot of people becoming more educated, much more so in the last 12 months or so than we saw probably in the first 6 months of this being rolled out. But there are still some misconceptions out there and misunderstandings. So Brian, maybe touch on some of the more common ones that you still see when you're either talking internally at CapTech or with clients out throughout the industry.
I think one of the misconceptions, and it's almost perceived barrier to entry, is that only large companies with massive amounts of resources really have the power to do this or have the resources and able to engage with these sorts of tool sets. What's amazing right now, and Kevin can attest to it, all the different things that on a regular basis are released by these large providers, cloud providers primarily, that really democratize access to this sort of capability. Whether it be things that allow you to enhance productivity, like Nicole was mentioning, or quick start kits that allow you to basically create new models and train new models with very little technical knowledge necessary. I think those things are really out there right now and allow you to have the opportunity to really engage very, very quickly and come up with proof of concepts that really demonstrate business value extremely fast. And you don't need to have thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars to train a model to do this sort of stuff. You can do it at your own pace with your own data in a way that allows you to really get started just now. The other misconception, I think we're starting to get past this now, but there always is a little bit of that fear factor of whatever data I provide, certainly to these cloud providers and in these large language models, is going to be compromised in some way, right? And so when ChatGPT 18 months ago came out, there was a lot of quick reactions by IT organizations saying, don't put your data out there, and a lot of personal reflection saying, okay, maybe I don't want to stuff all my healthcare information out there also because it has very personal information about me. We've gotten past that because of, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the cloud providers are at a place where you can spin up these things in your own environment with the latest models and do really everything that you want to do in a secure environment. And so it doesn't mean you don't have to worry about security, data security. It just means that the kind of the fallacy of anything you put into a model is all of a sudden going to be compromised is really not. There are ways to approach that way. It's not a problem anymore.
I think especially there with the data that you put into it, the biggest challenge is when you go to the customer-facing side of things. Because if you don't have good governance, like over your documents, for example, and you have things that are not marked, confidential, right? And you're like, yeah, this is public. I don't care. I just need this save button to get out of the way for me. Then you go, okay, cool. Let me train this on all of my public information. Well, now you've got people's salaries that are out there. And even if you're not exposing that out to customers, that may not be something that you want to just broadly share, in your internal chatbots either. So there's definitely the mindset that you still need to have around what data you're putting in, but it's a different reason than what it was a year ago.
I agree. And that's really where you have to leverage your workforce as well, right? This is a whole new kind of shift. We've always had data governance, trying to understand what data we leverage, but now you really have to focus on what is being exposed to these models. And in some cases, you want some of that exposed internally so that you can leverage it, but also looking at what is external facing, what is internal facing, who has access to what's coming out of those. So data governance and model governance in a way, and then even really explainability and bias come into play as well. You can have bias coming out of these models. It's been pretty well documented in lending, even in hiring. So some of the decision making as well. We have natural bias just in general, and these large language models are trained on immense amounts of data, and then you layer in your data in there. And there's always the possibility that the bias that naturally exists comes in. So you also need folks on your team that can really look at the models, monitor how the output is coming, and making sure that if it's a decision-making model especially, is it fair and unbiased, and having checks in place for that as well.
That's great. What about the one that's the kind of headline or the secondary headline that seems to follow AI a lot of times is, it's coming and it's taking all of our jobs. And there's all kinds of articles and papers and things being written about that. But love to hear your all thoughts. As knowledge workers ourselves, are we done before next year this time, or what do you guys think?
Long sits on the beach.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound bad. I think there's the adage, AI won't take your jobs, people using AI will. So the productivity gains, if I can do 10 times the amount of work that the person next to me is doing, why wouldn't you go with more people that can do that, right? You just get a lot more throughput. Yeah, it's clearly going to take some jobs, right? It's just absolutely going to. And so we've got to, as we adopt this, as we roll this out we really need to look at that change management aspect and that workforce management aspect. How do you upskill people? You're still going to need people to at least be watching the AI, right? Unless you really don't care. But you see, but their job looks a lot different, right? Now they're supervisors, now they're exception managers, and that may not be something that they have done in the past or may not be good at.
Right. The way that I heard it just put when I was reading something yesterday was, you can look at it and create the math problem and say, well, we've got 100 people. If we can do the same amount of work with 50, why wouldn't we? And really, I think the way to think about this is because all of our competitors are looking at it the same way. And if they're going to do that much more work with the same 100 people, now you're going to be lapped. And so this idea of not just reduce, right, and optimize in that regard, but what else is possible? How much further can we go? How can our people grow, our organization grow? And I think that growth mentality is going to be a really important part of where this goes, how quickly it gets picked up. I think I had, show of hands of how many people were terrified, and that may be terrified of, the computer overlords coming someday, and it may be terrified that I'm not really sure what this is going to mean to me. But the one big thing that we're seeing is you've got to use it, and it can be wonky, and you can struggle through it. But these models are publicly available. They're so available, and really the interface right now is just human language. And so it really does sort of lower the barrier to at least get in, touch them, start to work with them, and understand them. And we're doing a lot of that sort of like, research on your own, and we're seeing that in a lot of organizations. So I think that's going to be an important thing as we go forward.
I'll add one more point there, just because I was one of the people that would raise my hand about being fearful about this. There's times I wake up in the middle of the night like, oh crap, like what's going to happen next year, next month, type of thing. And I just don't, you have to embrace that. You have to find, yes, us as leaders in various companies and organizations have to try to encourage people, but individually you also have to take the responsibility to embrace this and see what the power is, what the possibility is, and that's the only way that you'll see really how to engage with it. Yes, there's possibility where there's going to be job transformation as a result of this, but in reality, I completely agree with Kevin. Like, once you get using this is the place where you're going to really outperform your competitors.
So let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing with our clients. We have approval. Anything we're going to talk about here, we have approval to share, just to be clear. But I'll kind of come down the line. But any specific examples of clients of ours that you guys want to touch on that you just think there are some interesting use cases or some progress or approach that's being taken? Turn it on to you guys.
Start. I am working with a retail startup. And they're small. So this is where kind of talking about AI can be leveraged, whether you're a massive company with huge resources or you're a small startup, you're now able to kind of harness that power. Today they have a process that's very manual, a lot of back and forth with their customers, and it puts strain on not only their employees, and they need more of them, it's also just not a great user experience for their target audience. So we're looking at ways that we can really, it's more of the virtual assistant type technology that we've talked about, but layering in that with their own data, and then their own process and forms, and how can we really put all of those together to make a seamless environment for the distillation of data back and forth, but also really talking to the customers, like how can we interact without them having to get on the phone or without them having to respond to an email. So we're leveraging AI in that facet, and it really is becoming a seamless integration. And it's exciting because, like I said, it is a very small company, and being able to implement an AI project for something so small is great, because 5 years ago, that really wasn't a possibility. It was really the really large firms that had the ability to leverage this type of technology.
I've been working with M&X Global Logistics. So this, they do time-sensitive logistics. Think about like shipping human tissue, corneas, brains, and these kinds of things. And to scale, like all of that's very white glove, right? You think that everything's very custom. Things like radio farm, you've got to be able to, you can only put so much nuclear material on a plane. Right, so they have to call and talk to the airline what's already on here. And to scale that, you've got two options. One option, prior to 3 years ago, which was just people. And that's a very hard way to scale a business, right? But With AI now, what they've been able to do, it was a really interesting journey, and it's very big shout outs to their leadership, because it was really like their CEOs mandating, saying, we're going AI, we're automating, do this now. And that sort of pressure from the top really made everybody say, okay, how do we do this, right? I don't need to worry about whether I'm ruffling feathers or anything like that. I've got the orders that I have to do this. So we'll just deal with whatever the challenges are along the way. But we started doing, first it was a lot of data cleanup to get their sort of house in order. They had multiple systems and it was kind of a mess, and it's hard to work with AI at that type of use case with dirty data. Then started in on a lot of automation, sort of the existing traditional RPA types of approaches. And that got into hyper automation with some systems integrating together, and then going into AI and using AI to do things like, they reduced their call volume, email volume by 50% by going out and doing courier selection and booking, automatically to really identify how do we get this package there the quickest.
Reducing by 50% over a 6-month project, over a course of a year? I mean, what timeline-wise, what are we talking about?
Within a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, within a year. So it was, I think, early last year that we had engaged with them, and that volume had already been dropped by I believe, the end of the year there. So some significant gains there. We're actually now starting to work on the next iteration of this, which is using multi-agent AI systems. So think about individual agents that are tailored to a specific role, right? This agent is very good at booking things and understanding. This agent's very good at tracking flights and making sure that everything's going to arrive on time, because if you're shipping a heart, it's only going to last so long, right? It's not like you can just keep the thing on ice and still put it in somebody else when it gets there. So there's a lot of nuances that can happen to that, though, right? If you've already got the heart in flight and there's a delay, sure, I need to find a new flight, but I also need to go and cancel, right, all of the other things that have already been booked. I need to reach out and communicate with the customer. Those customers have very specific preferences because, again, they've been used to this very white glove experience where they can call and talk to one person, right? They each have their one person that they even call. So dealing with those sort of nuances of what the customers want, right? If it's during this time frame, email this person. If it's during this time frame, call this other office. Those are the types of decisions that we really weren't able to do without generative AI. But these things then orchestrating across each other really allow them to be very responsive and almost, and even predictive in the ways that they're responding to this. So I think that this is going to go bad because it feels like there might be fog rolling in, and so that plane might get delayed. What can I start to do to accommodate that? Like, if it's important, maybe I don't want to risk it, right? Maybe I just want to throw that thing in a truck because I know I can get the 400 miles done on the ground and not have to worry about whether or not it's going to get there.
And through the use of AI, it's helping to make those specific decisions or recommendations.
Absolutely.
Is more of the, yeah, that's great. Yeah. And how about Brian? I know there's another example. I think it's kind of close to today and
very close
dear to our hearts.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've been talking about a lot about is around productivity, productivity of employees, making sure that the time you spend every hour of the day at work or at home or wherever you may be working is used to the maximum ability. And there's tool sets that Microsoft has released as an example, Microsoft 365 Copilot, which is basically puts your existing Office suite, think Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all those sorts of tool sets, builds AI into those tool sets, allows you to create massive efficiency gains, whether it be creating an outline and having it draft an entire email based off of that, or having that same outline also turn into a PowerPoint document that you are going to build off of. Those sorts of quick type of tasks that create operational efficiencies are what the tool sets like that are for. And Markel has actually embraced that, right? So when that tool set was first available last year, they spun up a quick pilot group and across all different job disciplines to see, well, what could the power of this possibly be? And the results were very compelling. They found that hours of time that were saved every week across all different types of job families, not just our engineers, the folks that are actually doing things, building new systems, but normal day-to-day types of activities across, again, all different leadership levels and skill sets. And so I believe I heard last week or a couple of weeks ago that's been rolled out to all of Markel to take advantage of as well. So the productivity benefits for employees is a great opportunity, and there's tool sets out there that really help enable that.
Yeah, and one just side part of that story that I think is really interesting, we talk about the change management side of this a lot. It is new, it can be scary. People may believe or think they don't have the skills to use it or approach it. And I know the one thing that Markel's been working on is really being consistent in that communication out throughout the organization. So highlighting some of those findings from the pilot group, highlighting what they were able to accomplish, how they felt about it, how they learned through the course of the pilot, and then putting that out, I believe, through like a video series through the whole organization to kind of let them know, get some excitement built up, but also kind of get a common understanding of what they're trying to do and why they're trying to do it. So definitely some top practices there that we're seeing, and it's great to see and great to be a part of that. So looking at the time here, we've got probably time for another question or two before we go to the audience. But we've talked a little bit about those examples and what we're seeing to start. But for a company that is new to AI, and Nicole, you touched on the fact that there doesn't have to be a huge cost barrier necessarily, but what are some maybe low-cost pilot ways, or what are we seeing in terms of rolling out Copilot is one. It's not necessarily no cost. There's a cost to that from the licensing perspective. But what are some of the things that you are recommending to clients if they're just starting to scratch the surface on where to start, what to look for in terms of where they can go from here?
Really starting to look at where you can gain efficiencies. So that's one of the lowest hanging fruit that you can kind of tackle. What do you have on your day-to-day that really takes time away from folks being innovative, being able to focus on other areas of the business? Anytime we kind of have these tasks that are repetitive, we often lose some of our space in our head, right, that we have to leverage to take that up, and it takes that away from other things that we could be doing, really putting personalized touches. So I really recommend and focus on where can you start tackling those to give your team the ability to really leverage what they're good at and remove some of those redundant tasks. So I look at it from a productivity side is one of the main areas. And like with the implementation of Copilot and things like that, it's easier to get in and get started there. It's kind of out-of-the-box tools. You definitely need some guardrails around them, and you need folks to help implement. But they're there and readily available, and there's training available as well. So from that main perspective, I would really focus on productivity tools. Kevin, I don't know if you have.
Yeah, I think that's going along with that. Really, like chat with your documents, chat with your data is a really easy one. Most of these now with Amazon Q, Microsoft's got this through their Azure OpenAI service as well. You can literally drag and drop your documents over and spin up one of these experiences inside of 15 minutes. Right? It doesn't require any kind of technical expertise to do so. There's quick start guides that walk you through exactly which buttons to click and what to type into each of the fields. Super, super easy. And if you think about like onboarding and the trouble of training people and getting them up to speed and what are the company policies and et cetera, being able to just say, hey, HR, drag and drop these things over, and now you've got your own chatbot. You didn't even need IT support to do this, and now your training is like instant, right? That's a really powerful way. That's really simple to get in, but I also think just start because immediately as soon as you start to implement your first project, you're going to get a call from risk, you're going to get a phone call from legal, you're going to get a phone call from compliance. You're going to get a phone call from customer experience, and you need to have those conversations. They're valuable conversations. It's not bad that they call. They should call. That's their job as well. But you need to get through them, and you need to figure out what those challenges are going to be just operationally for your company. So just start building that muscle memory.
Yeah, I'll add to that these large language models have been trained on everything that's available on the internet, essentially, right? What they're not trained on is data that's important to you inside of your organization. And so what is easy to do now, I'll throw a term out there that many of you may have heard, but retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. These RAG engines essentially are sidecars for these large language models that allow you to load your own private data into your own private data store and have the power of a large language model there to interact with it. So again, chatting with your data, think about, for us, we create a lot of proposals for our clients. We could have a repository of all those sorts of proposals that are available to us and say, I need to have a proposal where we've written an AI strategy for someone in the insurance industry. And what's the approach for that? And having something that curates that back as a starting point, again, not to write the whole proposal, because there's still a personal touch the way that we do that, but it's a great knowledge base enabler for information that's inside of your organization.
Great. So if organization, now everyone here is motivated to go start, right? Two questions, or a two-part question. Are we seeing organizations think of it as, I need to go build an AI team, right? That's one. So is there such a thing as the AI team? And then secondly, whether there is or isn't, what are some of the key skills that we're seeing that are easily transferable and or really need to be kind of built out within an organization when you think about the change curve and the people side of it? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. One is, I do think there is a time and place for selecting teams, call them tiger teams, whatever you want to really try to leverage some of the advanced technologies and things that Kevin dives into every single day, right? Having these teams that can really demonstrate the art of the possible with the latest capabilities inside of AI only opens the eyes for everybody else in the organization. So it doesn't mean everybody every day is going to be doing all that, but having somebody that can help prove to yourself or to the rest of the folks in your organization the capability is what I think these dedicated teams are for. And the personality of those people, they need to be open-minded, they need to be curious, they need to be undeterred by roadblocks, because you're going to find that something that worked yesterday may not work the exact same way it does today. And those sorts of personality traits are things you want in those teams that are really aggressively pursuing it. As far as everybody else, I do believe everybody should be at least engaging in ways with AI and figuring out how it applies to their day-to-day jobs. And so whether that's just leadership encouragement or personal self-interest in trying to learn this stuff, I think that's where we are right now.
I think you said earlier something around just the natural language is the interface, right, that you're going with. So I think that what you'll find, especially on the teams that are trying to just push art of the possible out and demonstrate what can be, instead of just summarize this document. It's great, it's super helpful, but also fairly bland in terms of the wow factor of that. I think you'll find technologists that are able to communicate and analysts that are able to think very critically and logically are going to be key roles and key skill sets that you'll see being successful, because a lot of it is natural language, right? And if I want to talk about what a logistics coordinator does, I need to be able to understand that, right? So I spend a lot more time in conversations with domain experts and SMEs than I would have, prior with just other architects. So I think that's a big one. Change management, hammered on that word a few times, but it's just really critical because everything that we build is going to have some impact on the business in some major way, on the people in some major way, on our processes in some major way. And having people that have had the mindset and experience to really understand, what are the implications there, who needs to be involved in conversations, how can we design for or around those impacts, is just critically important for the actual successful deployment of any of those things. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to have people to actually work the wires and turn the cranks. And in some cases where you're really trying to augment, people will be fearful, right? Half of you raised your hands. If that was because you're afraid of losing your jobs or the disruption there, and you're being handed this tool and saying, hey, prototype this, right? Pilot this out, see if this works for you. The kind of writing gets to be on the wall. And in some cases, you may have people even sabotaging your efforts. This thing is terrible, it didn't work at all, right? Because they know, if I say this is good, I might not be here to say the next thing is better.
I'll come from this as from a data side, right? We've talked a lot about interacting and and customer data and your own internal data, well, that really requires data governance. And, that's been around a long time, but we still see corporations and companies that have kind of put that to the back burner because it's not as exciting. But it's really critical now. If you don't have good data, if your data is not accurate, if it's not available, then the models aren't going to work the way you're expecting them to work. And also, Kevin mentioned it earlier, really marking what's confidential, what can be leveraged. So you really need somebody kind of watching that as well and making sure only the information that you want in these models is leveraged. They need to be, really governed, and the domain experts need to be there as well. So I think data governance is really coming back into play and is really important as we kind of explore the world of AI and what it can do for us.
It's coming from the data governance expert over there at the end. So
It is important.
AI is not taking your job. No chance.
I'll
say something
I'll
about
add one more just connectivity here, because I think I've said a few times, encouraging everybody to explore this. And I'll tie it back to something that I heard Tom and Tim say earlier this morning, which was when they look at companies, they look at them as people, right? When you look at AI, look at it like it's a person. Look at it like it's an assistant to you, and how would you leverage that assistant in ways to make your life better? And I think that's a mind shift type of approach when working with these sorts of tool sets that can really help you explore the possibilities and eventually get to the point maybe where you're creating these agents that Kevin's talking about.
Yeah, there's a really good book. Brian and I actually were just reading it. I've got one chapter left, so I don't ruin it for me if you've finished it already. But by Ethan Mollick, called Co-Intelligence. He's a professor at Wharton, and there's a lot of interesting parts in there. But the term he says a lot is make sure you invite AI to the party, and this idea that pull it in, figure it out. It may be a little bit messy, but make sure you include it, pull it in, and we'll kind of learn along the way. The other really interesting take on this sort of skill set thing that I just heard, I think it was last week, the CIO of Goldman Sachs referred to an emerging time here that's going to be the revenge of the liberal arts. And I thought that was a really, really interesting way. Now, he's a CIO who has a history degree and an MBA on top of that. But it was a really interesting way. I think when you think about this, that interaction, right, with these interfaces, the importance of really understanding your business deeply, understanding sort of the intention, where you want to go, and then how do you interact with these, right? What really almost thinking about how to think through this new world is going to be a really, really important skill set. And that barrier for sort of technology entry is lowered considerably. And so it's an interesting way to kind of put that. And I know I'm on the stage with 3 engineers, so you guys, we can debate that one over maybe over lunch a little bit, but I just thought that was an interesting take.
I think to that end, I've been telling our copywriters that they should be at the front of this, right? They have the best mastery of words out of everybody in our company, right? So, I think to the contrary, where writers are like, this is definitely going to take my job. Sure, but there's a better one sitting right there, just leveraging that technology, because you're able to communicate. And right now, at least, current state, ask again next week, new model, new game. But current state, the difference between pluralization of a word or conjugation of a word can have dramatically different meanings. And I mean, lightning versus a lightning bug, right? Like one little word can just absolutely change the way that the model responds. And when you're trying to get it to respond, like in the agent scenarios, where you are basically just playing the game of the bumpers, right? You're bowling, and you're just really trying to keep the agent going right down the right lane. So having really good understanding of how to express yourself clearly, I think, is going to be very important. So that, copywriters, I think, probably should be also on the list for the team.
Great. All right, we've got about 10 minutes left, and we're going to turn it over. We'd love to hear, come on up. I think both mics, I believe, are up in the front of the room. So if you've got a question, come on up and we'll do our best.
All right. Good morning. I'm a shareholder of Markel since 2008. To what extent is CapTech working with Markel Insurance to improve underwriting capabilities and to evaluate risk? And to what extent is CapTech doing large language modeling on Mr. Gaynor's public comments to predict what he's going to do next?
Thanks for the question. I'm going to say in front of a full packed house, we're not going to answer that one in detail. on what we're doing. Like with any client interaction that we have, we keep most of that fairly confidential. We've been working with them over the last few years. We mentioned the one example, which we had approval from Morse Taylor, their CIO, to kind of talk about the introduction of Copilot and what we're doing there. And what I'll say is we're working in a partnering way with them on that journey, helping them kind of navigate and work side by side. But I'll kind of stay out of some of the details on that for right now, if that's okay. Appreciate the question, though.
Hi, good morning. Toby Bernwald, shareholder from Atlanta since 2015. Thank you for putting this panel together. My understanding is that a lot of these AI and machine learning models are a little bit like black boxes where you can't exactly trace back how a decision was derived. And so I was curious about whether you're seeing these models applied in regulated industries, you know, insurance underwriting or maybe credit decisions and financial services. And in those instances, you know, how you can ensure that you comply with all the, you know, the regulatory requirements.
That's a really timely question. We were talking about that over coffee this morning, and oddly enough, and I'll let you guys kind of jump in on your thoughts on this. But Anthropic announced today, and if we weren't up on stage, I'd probably be watching the press conference, that they have actually done some research that has broken through that a bit. I haven't heard the details yet, but literally as of this morning at 8 a.m., they were talking about they've made some headway into really understanding. And for those of you that just on the background of the question, the really intriguing and confusing thing about all of this is these models work, they work fairly well, and no one could describe exactly why, which is a bit unnerving. And so we were getting these answers, but we didn't really know why. They've done some aspects of sort of mapping that, almost like testing the human body with, scanning the brain while you, touch your pinky finger or do something, see what parts of the brain light up. They've basically started to make some progress on that. So we may know a little bit more in the near future, but I'll let you guys kind of take that one.
I think so. What Andy's referring to is called mechanistic interpretability. So how do you do this at scale? How do you poke and prod this 1 trillion parameter model to understand exactly how it's working? It's a huge field, right? There's billions of dollars being poured into that research as well. And what Anthropic has been able to do, they are identifying like 14 million or so features that were inside of the model. So every time, to the point of what area of the brain lights up. So some of them were very vague, like, oh, this is talking about transportation. We can see that that feature lights up only when you're including something about transportation. And they also can get very specific, like, oh, this area lights up for words that come after talking about the Golden Gate Bridge. And then you also see clusters that they've been able to identify as well. So contextual items or things that are related. So you might see Golden Gate Bridge, you might see also features activating that are around famous monuments. So they're definitely, it's learned a structure, right, off of all of our text. And it's really just about figuring out like what that structure actually is. In the same way we don't know how brains really work, but we're getting there, right? It's getting better and better. Towards the regulation part of things, it's definitely, we talked about where to start. I wouldn't go out of the gate with something that's in your heavily regulated areas. That's going to be a lot harder for you to do. But it ultimately comes down to evaluations, right? Having an evaluation set that you can say, here's what I feel like is good, here's what I feel like is bad. And there's this gray area in between I'm not really sure about, but I'm going to define this in tens of thousands of entries, right? And you can use generative AI to help synthesize that set out based off of some seed information. But that's the only thing that's really going to give you that confidence and give the regulators that confidence to know that this is working and working in the ways that it should, because you can just literally demonstrate red light, green light on whether or not it's giving you the decisions that you're hoping for.
The other thing I'll add to that is you need to know which tool in the toolbox to use, right? So if you think about how I framed it up around the different buckets of more advanced analytics, predictive analytics versus generative AI, that may not be a use case for generative AI, right? There are examples where you can use data scientists and create models based off your data to predict outcomes, and that's easily traceable, right? These are things that have been in the industry for a decade or more around detecting fraud and evaluating credit risk score. Those sorts of things are things that you might want to look at leveraging that sort of capability in this space as well.
Good question. Yes.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Jennifer Clancy, and I thank you all for being here and for helping us with the information you provided so far. To better understand CapTech, could you please share with us what your target customer is and what the anticipated process would be that you would take them through, and help define what the expected resources they would need, not only from people, but also of time and capital in order to bring something to a completion? And then after the point of the first milestone of completion, how do you perceive the ongoing relationship being, and how long is it ongoing?
That was a threefer. That was three questions there. I'll try to help you guys. I can take the first one.
Yep.
The vast majority, so we work with organizations from startup up through Fortune 10 organizations, primarily throughout North America. Our sweet spot and our largest focus, though, is around Fortune 1000 organizations and state governments. We don't do anything in the federal government space for a whole host of reasons, but we've had a lot of success with various state governments. And so that's kind of the type, the size of organization that we typically target proactively. Like I said, we've done work with startups and smaller organizations, nonprofits, certainly throughout our time. Each one of those approaches then is sort of tailored to, you asked about kind of the people, the resources, the capital needed. You guys want to talk a little bit about just how we sort of look at and maybe approach assessments and the
Yeah,
style of work?
specifically in this space, don't try to boil the ocean up front, right? We're doing a lot of engagements, and it's mind-boggling sometimes for us, but a lot of engagements that are 3 to 4 weeks long, really just to go through and understand what are some of the opportunities and around where AI can support it, even building a quick POC in that amount of time period, right? And that way you can get an assessment of whether or not you're going to get value out of it to determine, should I invest in the 3 to 6 month like project, or sometimes much longer than that. So I think it really, right now, the encouragement we're seeing is, due to the nature of how this is changing so quickly, try to these proof of concepts, these proof of value, make sure you can get value out of it where you're investing before you make the bigger investment.
Right, and a lot of times that lower investment, that lower bar to get started, it allows collectively, for working in partnership with an organization, it allows us to learn together a bit, right? Through some of those quick hit, we can be nimble. The biggest thing, all consultants get a bad rap for the 5-year program that never seems to end. You can never get closer to the finish. The money keeps pouring in. The results don't come out. And really, for a long time, we've based everything that we do on trying to show that quick results, understand the value, pivot if we need to, and make sure that there's sort of an ongoing dialogue on what we're trying to do. I don't know which one came up first, sorry.
Hey, Ashby Price. Quick question. The focus of the panel has been AI's impact on the business community. How are you seeing AI impact the educational system? What trends are you seeing over the next 5 years, and how do you see that impacting the business community in the future?
I'll jump
Good
in
question.
there.
Go ahead, Kevin.
So I have my a 3-year-old daughter. She's my little language model that I spend training time. I am looking forward to it. Not the least of which is to not have the $2 million college bill at the end of the process. I think it's gonna really transform education, and being able to say, here's exactly where I'm at, right? And what is the next thing I need to learn? Or here's the thing I just got wrong. What specifically can I do to, correct that error, right? The fastest way that we learn is to actually predict something, get it wrong, and then figure out the right way. And when you're in like a typical classroom setting, you've got your teachers that are, especially like in the public education, really having to cater down to that lowest common denominator of the class, because that's how they're rated and reviewed, and you have to advance a certain number of people, et cetera. And that also leaves the higher performers really kind of lacking on what it is that their growth potential would be. Being able to partner directly with an AI that knows where you're trying to get to is just going to be so much more efficient. And again, everything changes day to day, so I'm not fully read up on the details, but Microsoft just announced a partnership with Khan Academy to accomplish exactly that yesterday. So I think, for Cora, my daughter, literally, I've got the shortcut to ChatGPT on my lock screen, and she knows how to go in and push it, and we've been working to make sure that she pronounces things very clearly. Diction's been a very important lesson over the past couple of years. And the rate at which she's learning things is surprising. And my wife was a teacher for 10 years, K through 5. And she looks at my daughter sometimes and she's just kind of like, what? How do you even know that? And, Alexa, mommy.
I think the one-on-one concept of tutoring is going to expand and explode, right? It's going to be the barrier to be able to access that type of truly dynamic one-on-one learning that's customized for an individual, I think is going to explode. And that is something that Khan Academy is already building in to their tools. And then another part in that book that I mentioned, Co-Intelligence, I thought was interesting. College professor talked about for years, the model of the classroom has been sort of group lecture, right? You learn a concept and then you go home and you practice it through homework. And that's been for 100 years, that's how it's worked. He's actually starting to see an opportunity to flip it completely. That the common understanding, you're gonna go do that on tools at home. Watch a lecture, understand, get that one-on-one tutoring. The together time is gonna be about collaboration, interaction, actually thoughtfully talking through what you learned. I thought that was a really interesting concept as well. I think we're just about at time, but you're standing, so we'll do one more.
All right. Thanks. Hey, Andrew, shareholder from Virginia. Talking about yesterday's announcements at Build, there is the announcement of Copilot Plus laptops, the integration into hardware, and also I'd like to get your thoughts on that, implications of that, and also the recall feature, where it's taking snapshots of a user's desktop forever. And maybe can do some great things like automate, but then there's the automation privacy sort of dichotomy there.
We were just talking about that a little bit this morning as well. You guys want to wrap that up in a minute
I'm
or
excited
so?
for it. I think that there's definitely a level of privacy concern, but on the other hand, making these models able to run locally on your laptops also gives you some of that privacy and data control back, because it's never leaving your machine and being broadcast out to other servers. So you don't have to worry about that as long as everything's above board and it actually happens. The recall thing is particularly interesting. I can see the theory of, hey, this is all staying on your device. I can see an IT organization quickly going, well, that's my computer. And so I want all of that as well. And, I don't know what that does for people, what they're doing with their laptops. I'm assuming mine's pristine and there's no reason to worry about that at all. But there's really big benefits and there's really potential trade-offs or potential risks from just the sort of invasiveness.
All right. Thank you all so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.